Hi, this is Kimberly Reuter, business advisor and supply chain expert, and welcome to my podcast, The Morning Mood. Oh, it has been a minute since I have recorded kind of off the cuff. The original concept of this whole podcast was to be, kind of what was currently on my mind. And it kind of took a life of its own, which has been really awesome. And I've been recording with a lot of guests. And I've still been recording, but it hasn't been quite what it was originally, which is me just kind of sitting up, getting out of bed, grabbing a cup of coffee, and recording. And that's okay. Um, it's a journey. But I was having a conversation yesterday with Tiana, who by now you have all met through the Freedom series. And the concept of not the concept, the practice of DevOps came up. Now, for those of you who don't work in technology, DevOps is the operation of software development. Also, some companies call it tech ops. Lots of companies have stupid names for it because they think they're special. But anyway, DevOps is the operation of developing software, and there is an actual operation and process of developing software. And when I was working in operations at Amazon, we did not have product managers or program managers. You were it. I started recording with Carrie Morris, who you will hear from shortly, who built private label at Amazon. And we share our similar experiences where we were hired as an individual to run a risky business, basically. They said, come in, we have this concept. We're not sure it's really going to work. We think you're the smartest person to try it out, and we're going to give you some runway and we're going to see what happens. And so that was my experience. I had been working with Vastera for 2 years as a product manager there, but that was very controlled. The technology, the engineers were very much driving that organization. Same for Amazon, to be honest with you, but we worked that shit out. But Amazon was a very tech-heavy organization. Business people were not prized in operations. I think in the merchant world, there was a different philosophy around that, but in ops, business people were second citizens. The tech people were the people who really mattered. In fact, they had entire different comp schedules than the business people did. And I don't really agree with that, but ultimately I was made whole. So it was all good because what I contributed spanned both. So when you come in as a business person, I'm working directly with an engineer. I'm working with Andrew, I am tracking his ass down. We're gonna get him on here and we are gonna tell the Amazon global story, which is fucking phenomenal. So he's coming. He's on vacation right now. He's coming back. I promise. We're gonna get Andrew. But that was my experience, and so I really had to learn about how does software get developed from the engineers, right? I didn't learn it from a book or a class or a workshop or a product management director. I learned it from the engineers. How do they develop code, and how do I plug into it? Now, the beautiful thing in the early days at Amazon, we didn't have any sort of program management. So if you wanted code written, you track down the dude who wrote the code. It was almost always a dude, and in his pajamas and five-toe sneakers because for some reason kilts, pajamas, and those five-toe creepy sneakers were the fashion statement. Probably still are at Amazon. That was what it was all about. Oh, by the way, new look here, putting a bond treatment on my hair, so I know the head treatment. I did try to straighten it out so it wasn't quite so Grey Gardens, but I'm not sure if I did it. But anyway, told you not a beauty show. So back to Amazon, and so I learned how to develop software from the engineers. How do they do it? How do I plug into it? We didn't have a program management team. So, I found the guy who was writing the code. I went to his desk. I told him what I needed. He told me when he could get it in. I told him that was unacceptable. We negotiated back and forth. And, I agreed to do work for him or take a project off for him or whatever we negotiated to make it work so that both of our work streams move forward. I think that was the other thing too. The beauty of that system, and it is not scalable. Like I am not recommending that Microsoft go back to a free for all dev project or dev program. It was beautiful as one of the only few business people in a huge group of engineers because I could pretty much get my shit done and I'm very persuasive. And as I said, we work together. So in a lot of times what I would do is take work that they didn't want to do. So if they had to write a document or they had to tell someone they didn't want to go talk to somebody, they had to give them bad news, I would go do it. That was we bartered, and it was beautiful, and we built great shit fast. So fast. It was gorgeous. There was no processes of Wild Wild West. I remember even, like, threatening engineers, like, 'cause they wouldn't return my phone calls. I'd be like, "I'm coming to your desk. If you don't call me back, I know code goes out on Thursday. I gotta get it. I gotta get it." And so it was beautiful, but not necessarily skatable or sustainable, and obviously prime for, you know, politicking. But, you get your shit done. That's how it works. So, enter product program management. Well, I guess it's called program management. I don't know. Every different company has a name for it. And companies actually get big fights over who's the product manager and who's the program manager and what does that mean and who gets to say it. I'm going to just leave it at this. You don't need both. You need a product manager or a program manager, whatever you're going to call them, but you don't need two. And most companies I see that are fighting over product manager and program manager have both. So that's your first problem. But what is a dev cycle? What is tech ops? So tech ops way back in the day when it first started out, besides this great wild wild west shit that we used to do, and I fucking loved it. One of the first dev models was what was called waterfall. And that was where when you think of waterfall, think of like IBM, SAP, like big houses where they would spend in the original waterfalls like years defining, because they were also at the same time building the hardware, let's not forget. And that also took time. Years building the requirements for something. And that would go on forever. And those processes are typically they're horribly painful. I've been through them. Because what happens is a business and engineer, and they have all these meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings, meetings, and by the end of it, they hate each other because they don't speak the same language. And that's where some of this, when you see the newer models introduce languages. I hate a new language, let me tell you. But they introduce languages to help with this barrier issue. So the original ones were just a bunch of really smart engineers and a bunch of really smart business people getting in a meeting and just fighting about it to figure out what they were going to try to build. And these would go on for years and years and years. And then the engineers would go away and they would build and build and build and build and build and build and build. And maybe there would be like a reveal or a phase one or a review. But that was kind of it. And then they launched the software. There might be a soft launch. They would do soft launches was kind of the concept back then. And waterfall still lives on today. Like I talk about, waterfall to me is like ancient, and I can't think of any organization who should be using a waterfall model. I mean, seriously, if you've got one, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear about it. But that was an ancient philosophy. Companies are still using it. When I was at Nordstrom, Nordstrom was still using a waterfall model. Now, Nordstrom did not believe that they were using a waterfall model. They called it agile. Now, what you will get when you have waterfall organizations that have not fully embraced the agile model for a variety of reasons, you will get what's called wet agile. And that is my favorite name for it because it's gross. Other people call it agile fall. I've called wagile. All these cute little names. It is wet agile, and it is nasty and sloppy and as gross as it sounds, because it is an absolute abomination of both. You cannot do wet agile. Okay. Stop it. So then what is agile, and why do people try to do wet agile when and this is what I hear. Well, we're transitioning. Bullshit. You can transition with a project. You don't have to transition a whole department. Start with one project and then you go from there. Okay. And I just wanna also say this, I see this everywhere. I mentioned companies that I may have worked with or had experiences with, and sometimes people get upset and they're like, "Oh," and I'm like, "Look, I see it everywhere. You're not alone, okay? If I had to list them all, that would be our whole 20 minutes, okay?" So, I see it everywhere. It's not specific to them, but they had a pretty glaring problem. So what is agile? Agile is the concept of continuously deploying code. That's all it is. Okay, I'm just gonna break it down. That is all it is. All this bullshit that is piled on top of it is just bullshit. The core of agile software development is continuously deploying code to get to a what is called a most valuable product, an MVP. And I've heard about 1,000 different versions of MVP. Most valuable product. I ain't playing your games with the jargons. We're gonna have a whole episode on jargon and why it's bullshit. But you need a minimum viable product, MVP, and that is your goal, is you're continuously developing code in a sequence that will get you to an MVP. And the MVP is designed to meet 70 to 80% of the functional needs. Functional, I didn't say technical, functional needs. Now you have to have the technical to support the MVP, but there's still going to be some technical work going forward, okay? Because this is a hanging point I get on sometimes. Once you have your MVP, you can start testing. You do not stop dev. You continue to dev as you test, and you continue to add to the dev cycles as you're learning. If you find something that's broken, of course, we stop, we go back, we fix it, we make sure everything's backward compatible, and then we move forward again. But the nut, the genesis, the diamond, the ball in the middle, the GUI and the Tootsie Roll on Agile is the continuous deployment of code on a specific project. I've seen this too, but we are continuously develop, but that's on 14 other things. That's not what I'm talking about. Because what happens is people get caught up, especially engineers, get caught up in continuous code deployment, okay, which is also a term, which is a way of continuous code deployment. You can be doing continuous code deployment and still not being agile. And that's where Wagile comes in. Okay. Like, oh, we're continuously deploying code. Just because you're sending bug fixes out every night does not mean you're continuously deploying code. It means you're fixing your bug shit faster. Well, congratulations. Please do that. But that's not agile. It is the continuous deployment of code in development of new code, not bug fixes. So let me put that caveat on there for everybody who's going to run out there and say, she said, new code. Now, what comes ahead of that? There's a lot that comes ahead of that because everything that came ahead in waterfall, all that stuff that had to happen in waterfall that took 2-3 years to build still has to happen. It doesn't go away. You still have to define what you're building. So what is the front end of this agile thing? In order for agile to work, it is the classic shit in, shit out. You don't have tech without business. Unless you were and even then you don't have tech without business. I was just gonna say, unless you're running a tech, development operation, but somebody's paying you to develop the code, right? So, you do not have tech without business. Business drives tech. Now, I have gotten into some knockdown dragouts on this. Hallway screaming matches. Go for and over the cubes on this topic. Because there are engineers out there who will not accept this. And I'm like, well, what the fuck are you going to write? Go ahead, write something. Let me see it. Yeah, right. That's my point. You don't know what to write because that isn't your specialty. Your specialty is code. If I knew how to write code and I knew business, I wouldn't need your ass. Okay? You write beautiful code that makes the business requirements come to life. It is a partnership. Okay? You work together. One is not better, smarter, faster, more entitled, whatever. And I didn't really agree with how Amazon thought about it because if I wasn't there to tell them what the hell to do, then they wouldn't have known how to do it. All right. So off that soapbox. But as the business person, you have responsibility. And this is where I do get kind of upset about it because I see business people who are like, oh, well, it's all tech's fault. No, it starts with the story. It starts with the requirement. I'm going to call them requirements. Everybody's got a name. User story. I can't even. Stories, user stories, requirement stories, actor stories. There's actors. We've introduced actors who are just really just different users. It's gotten fucking crazy. It's a Broadway show. DevOps has become a Broadway show. I'm just going to say it. DevOps has become a Broadway show. But the taking out all the bullshit, all the theatrics, it's the requirements have to be good. As the business partner, your job is to write the best business requirement that you can and as much detail and concise. No freaking 17-page business requirements. Think it out, crystallize it. That's your job. Don't dump that shit on somebody else. Clean out your thoughts. That is your job. Your second job is to review those requirements patiently, with kindness, with your tech partners to make sure that they understand what they mean. And herein becomes the problem with having a product and a program manager, and why I'm very much against it. At this step in the process, my preference is to be talking directly to the person who's going to be writing the code. Now, I know in different organizations that may not be necessarily possible. Hopefully, I'm talking to, the sprint manager or somebody who is technical and is going to be involved in the code writing. Because this is where we get the product program manager tension, struggle, and miscommunication, and thus mistranslation. So, in order for this handoff from business to tech, I've written my requirements, I've grouped them together in ways that I think make sense. Okay. Again, this is another thing of stories and epics and novels and chapters, and everybody's got a term and every software's got a term for it. But again, down to the basics, y'all. I have grouped this shit together in a way that I think makes sense for a business release, a business requirement release, a business functionality release, I guess is really it is at that point. And I really want to talk to the dude who's going to write the code or be as close to that code as possible. When you introduce a program manager into here, a lot of times a program manager is not technical enough. They may be high T, but they don't write code. And they're not going to be writing the code. And a lot of times they may not understand the environment and the atmosphere that this code is going to live in, the dependencies, et cetera. And so when you add this additional layer of a program manager, you lose that direct plug-in. And just like on a bike with a chain, anytime there is a transfer of the energy, you're going to lose a little bit of energy. Okay, if you ever done any cycling, any sort of racing, any sort of anything about go fast, fast, right? You know about the loss of momentum and energy through clutches, through gears, etc. This is what happens when you have a product program manager dynamic. There is a loss of that direct energy. Now, I have argued with this, oh my God, and I would not say that I have won, but I think I made a dent. Because a lot of times the program manager really isn't understanding what's going on. And they're just a hindrance to the process. So have one or the other. Don't have both. Okay. But the person who is defining the business requirements, whether that's your product or program manager, I don't give a shit what you call them. Call them little prince and princesses for all I care. No, don't do that. That'll go to their heads. Their job is to clearly define what it needs to do, how it needs to look, and what will be an acceptable MVP. That's the grouping of the stuff. We've grouped this stuff together. We think this is our MVP. Okay. That is your job. If you don't do your job correctly, everything downstream will fail. That's why it is so important. Because when the engineer goes to write his code, he's not going to know what to write because he's not going to understand it. Because you weren't clear, or you said this but not that. That's also part of the requirements review, is to get clarity on all of that stuff so that they know what you're talking about, right? That's the flow. That's how it works. They write the code, they do their own code checks, they make sure that they're meeting all the requirements for that code, They do a code deployment. There's a release check. It goes out. You have an MVP. Hopefully, your MVPs aren't taking more than 3 months. That's the other thing. Your MVPs should not take longer than 3 months. I don't care what you're building. You got to get it out there and you got to learn and see what it is. You got to know what's going on. You got to know what's happening. Even if it's itty bitty, even if you got 10 people using it, even if it's just internal, you got to get something out there. 3 months. Make that your challenge. So the last thing I want to talk to you guys about, and I am way going over because obviously this was a hot topic for me. And it's the thing that no one talks about enough. It's the very end, and it's actually where you should start. And it is part of writing your requirements, and that is acceptance testing. Too many organizations wait to write acceptance testing to the very goddamn last end. The very end. We're getting ready to deploy the whole thing and we're still working on acceptance testing. Wrong. Acceptance testing needs to be written when the user requirements are written, because we need to know what's going to make it acceptable. That needs to be part of the initial review. Here's the business requirement. Here's our acceptance testing. Do you know how many times I have identified an absolute, oh my God, right there? Wait a minute. Your business requirement says this, but your user acceptance test says this. They are not even remotely related. Like, what? You're telling us the requirement's this, but we're not going to accept it until it does that? Let me tell you, if you were an engineering manager, I just let you in on a little secret. This will protect your ass every day of the week. Look at that user acceptance testing before you start writing code, because you're going to be writing something that you think's going on over here, and then the user acceptance test is going to come in and you're going to be like, wait, what? Right. Don't forget user acceptance testing. Do not put it to the end. I don't care what you call it. What the function of it is, that it's the testing that you do to make sure that that code looks, feels, and operates the way that it was expected. And because if it doesn't, you will not get the desired outcome. That's the whole damn point, is to drive money and outcome. That's why you do this. That's why. Not to be right in a meeting, not to have more epics than anybody else, not to have the biggest sprints. None of that shit matters. This whole process of DevOps is to make sure that what you're putting out there is getting out as fast as possible, is as clean as possible, and is as productive as possible. That is what DevOps is about. Too many companies, too many organizations, too many individuals are caught up in words, terms, bullshit, arguments over software. Agile is about continuous deployment of code with the goal to get to an MVP. 3 months. That's it. DevOps. Biz does not live without tech. Tech does not live without biz. Biz drives the direction of the company. Tech builds it. Business, navigator, tech, sail trimmer. Both important. Both make the boat go forward in the right direction. Tech is not better than biz. Biz drives direction of tech. And my last and least, leave the agile behind. Forget wet agile. Just transition. You're fooling yourselves with this, we're a hybrid. You're not. It's bullshit. Get off it. Kill wet agile. All right. Whew, that's 26 minutes. So my Great Gardens bandana is kind of working for me. But thank you. Obviously a hot topic for me. Would love to hear your comments.